Hey, Detoxers! I'm Nolan Higdon, and today I'm joined by the ever brilliant Sydney Sullivan. Big news! Disinfo Detox is leveling up. In addition to bringing you interviews from experts that the legacy media will not entertain, we're evolving into your go to space for breaking down media, politics, and education with a critical eye. What do we have for him, Sydney?
Got a full episode. We're starting with a closer look at the conversation unfolding around Original Sin, the new book on Biden's 2024 run, co-written by CNN's Jake Tapper. There's been a lot of buzz, a lot of strong reactions, and we're going to unpack what's at stake beneath the headlines. We'll go into Embrace the Woo-Woo. It's a new Economist article about exploring unconventional shifts in the Republican Party under Donald Trump's second term. After that, we'll dive into Elon Musk's Grok AI, pushing dangerous debunked myths about a so-called white genocide in South Africa. Then we'll address the tragic and still developing story of the Palm Springs fertility clinic bombing that happened over the weekend. After which, we're going to talk about the haunting and heroic efforts of educators in Gaza who are literally risking their lives to keep children during an ongoing siege. And finally, Nolan's going to tell a little bit more about a chilling and ethically questionable ad he got from an AI companion. Spoiler, a little bit like Black Mirror.
Yeah, you're going to want to stick around for that. That's going to be something else. So this week, Jake Tapper of CNN and Alex Thompson of Axios, they dropped a political grenade with their book Original Sin. The full book hasn't come out, but they offered us some excerpts that, among other things, revealed the extent to which the Biden cabinet was concealing from the public and the media about Joe Biden's both mental and physical decline. There was talk about whether or not they could wait till after the election to put him in a wheelchair. He reportedly didn't recognize a major donor who was throwing an event for him, also a very famous person he'd been friends with for years, and George Clooney. And so this reporting really was kind of introduced by the media, at least in my estimation, as an attack on the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party tried to conceal Biden's condition. Also, on Friday, I believe it was, or last week, Robert Hur, he was the investigator who had investigated Biden, and during the last year of Biden's campaign had filed a report where he said that you couldn't put Biden basically under investigation or trial because he'd be too sympathetic. He's like a doting old grandpa who's forgot even what the date his son died, and he's confused and things like that. And Hur was really attacked by the Democratic leaning media at the time for having this negative critique of Biden, which the whole media kind of dismissed the contention that Biden was in cognitive decline. But last week, some of Robert Hur's audio came out, and it seems to confirm his contention that Biden was a confused old man. And then to top things off, Biden was diagnosed with stage 5 cancer. Meaning that had he been reelected, it's looking very unlikely he would have been able to finish that second term in office. So I don't know about you, Sydney, but when I was watching this coverage, I was particularly frustrated with the fact that all the focus seemed to be on the Democratic Party, which without a doubt, the Democratic Party lied. But the news media seemed to take no responsibility for the fact that they were defending these lies and ignoring these lies. And now that the lies are impossible to avoid, now all of a sudden they're mad at the Democratic Party for lying to them, where it's like, you're the news media. I mean, were you shocked that politicians lied to you?
Sure.
What do you think about it, Sydney?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I think we tend to focalize on the things that a lot of people make arguments, for example, that you're choosing the facts that suit your argument the most. And I think that tends to be the case with media as well, and whichever arguments are tending to speak to someone that they think is going to help them gain a certain kind of level of popularity or a certain level of acknowledgement in the media. And so I think that tends to be frustrating in moments like this too, when we have like this big quote unquote reveal and we see that something is how we think it is in the media is like kind of coming to reveal that.
Yeah, and I think they also, speaking to that, they've done a real retelling of history where it seems like they're insinuating that like Biden's cognitive decline didn't start till around 2022-ish, and that's when the cabinet concealed it. But I remember writing about it and talking about it in 2019. Even people in the Democratic Party, like Senator Cory Booker or the ex director of HUD, Julian Castro, they were talking about Biden's age. There were numerous videos of Biden being confused and misspeaking on the campaign trail. Remember, he called that one supporter fat and told Charlemagne the God, "You ain't black if you don't vote for me."
Mhm.
I think there were a lot of signs that the media, is now totally ignoring and saying, "No, this wasn't a problem till 2022." But my thought on this, I have a piece coming out about this too, is that the news media, I think, always felt so threatened by Donald Trump that their response was to support everyone who was against Trump. And I think that's really backfired because in the process, they lost a lot of their credibility, even though there are obviously substantive critiques of Trump that I've made, and I'm sure you've made. There's when you demonstrate that you have such a slant, it makes it difficult for people to trust you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I notice things like that in my classroom as well, which is why I tend to allow people to discuss and critically evaluate different sides of the news, different kinds of opinions, because I don't want them to feel as if the classroom space is one in which they don't or are not allowed to discuss bias or aren't allowed to discuss these kind of critical and really ever evolving opinions that happen and that we see in the news. And when you do only get one side of opinion, or when you do feel like your teacher, for example, is very opinionated and one-sided, you really don't get an opportunity to have those critical lenses, that critical awareness to be able to discuss in a way that can actually make you change your mind about something.
Yeah, and let's, from embracing the classroom as you're talking about there, let's talk about embracing the woo woo.
Embracing the woo.
See what I did there? That was a good
Yes, I
transition.
did. That was yeah, embracing the woo-woo. So really, it's a new Economist article that explored the unconventional shifts in the Republican Party under Donald Trump. It really highlights how the party is increasingly appealing to individuals interested in these alternative wellness practices, things like guidance from nature, experiencing with psychedelics, embracing like these non-traditional, if you'll say, like spiritual insights. So I just loved this piece because it was really just using irony and satire to talk about the ways in which conservative values are now embracing what some might call like these woo woo beliefs. Like it's suggesting that this transformation is in part a larger quest for meaning and really what's become a chaotic political landscape, especially in relation to well-being. So figures like Trump are being reshaping a party's identity to include like a mix of spirituality and these ideas that were once considered more fringe. And so
You know what it kind of sounds like to me, and I think this makes it even more kind of humorous. It really sounds like the Republican Party has kind of adopted a lot of the kind of counterculture ideas of the baby boomer movement, right? This like individualism and hedonism and
mhm.
this larger like spirituality feel good movement of the 70s and things. It is really fascinating to see so much of this now in the Republican Party because it was such a defining feature, liberals in the Democratic Party for certainly the last 50 or 60 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and when you don't believe in science, what happens is you become attached to pseudoscience and you become attached to these more fantastical and magical ways of thinking rather than rooting them in reality. I was just reading Carl Sagan's book on the demon haunted world. And 30 years ago, he's writing about how people don't believe in science. And it's because of pop culture and it's because of the media. And this was in 1996. And it hasn't really even become, social media hasn't become popularized at all. And he's already talking about the concern that he has for people being so gullible. He talks about like how skeptical treatments are so hard to find because even super bright and curious people who rely entirely on popular culture to be informed about something are much more likely to believe in a fable that's treated uncritically than a sober and balanced assessment of something.
There's something else I always think that plays a role in there as well. And I don't know. Tell me what you think about this. I know this has been something that's lost me a lot of friends in the COVID era. Uh, but I think there's always been this conflation of science with big pharma. And
Mm.
I think a lot of people's skepticism is rooted in the for-profit model of big pharma, not necessarily the scientists themselves, but the fact that anytime you're making money doing something, there's always that conflict of interest, right? There's that question of are you doing this because it's the right thing to do in terms of health or for the good of like humanity, or are you doing this for profit? And I always think that that conflict of interest is like a form of skepticism that leads some people down the insane path where they start rejecting all science instead of
Mm.
rejecting the problems that arise from the for-profit aspect of big pharma. But I don't know. What do you think? Does that relate to this article at all as you see it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this is a really frustrating concept and one that I think as I've gotten older, as I've seen the people I love go through different illnesses and diseases and seen them go through the medical system, that I personally feel very frustrated with, and that I find that I understand and empathize why people become frustrated and think that it's horrible and a scam. I tend to get a little bit frustrated when I then see people turn around and say, well, all of it's a sham, because I don't think that that's true.
Yeah, I think that's well said. And here we'll move on from the discussion of how to save many lives from the to the fabrication of white genocide in our next segment here. And this story, I mean, really caught my attention. I was really kind of surprised too, and I think this is speaks to the ways in which media has changed under 2.0, Trump 2.0, because anything that even like tangentially had to do with race really became a center focal point of the news media during Trump 1.0. But there was this major story about Elon Musk's AI chatbot Grok that got some coverage, but not a lot. Apparently, the chatbot reportedly was spreading the false and racist conspiracy theory that there is, quote, a white genocide happening in South Africa,
Mm.
a claim long debunked but frequently weaponized by white nationalists. And there's a lot to say here about Elon Musk and his racial views and how he apparently accidentally gives Hail Hitlers. But I think there's a media lens question here that I think is more critical. And this is interesting to me because I remember this during the TikTok ban this happened. All these systems, these algorithms on your social media feed, the algorithms on Google search, these AI bots, they're all programmed by humans. They're all learning from humans and they replicate the data in which they're programmed with. And so, Elon Musk here, his Grok bot, I think, illustrates the problem with this. When people go and use these different services and they think they're getting, objective access to boundless information, they're
Mm.
gravely mistaken. They're getting a curated, managed experience. And we've seen the studies that these AI bots have been pretty successful in convincing people to adopt worldviews that are incorrect or against the evidence. And I kind of looked at this story as sort of a warning sign. It doesn't take a lot of people. You just need enough to believe there's a white genocide in South Africa to have them take horrendous actions.
Mhm.
But I don't know. What did you make of the story?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really kind of focusing in on your point about how people don't quite know or don't recognize the fact that AI is designed by humans and humans are flawed. And I think because it's so capable and so able to give us so much information, we see it as just perfect or incapable of making mistakes. And I also think that the way that we see those mistakes can be hard too, like being able to actually articulate like this is what it's doing wrong, or these are the biases and the mistakes that it's making, can be hard. I know for my students, I show them more physical things, like with Dolly, you'll ask Dolly like, show me an example of a working class citizen in blank 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 field, and it'll, one of the biggest things it showed was ageism and sexism. It only ever showed women who were young. They were pretty much saying like old women cannot work in this particular field. And they only ever showed women with no wrinkles. Like women could only look a certain way in those fields as well. So it was interesting because the students could visually see, oh, this is where the bias is happening. And I think that was important for them because otherwise difficult to kind of wrap your head around, like, what is this bias and where can I like pinpoint to it?
Yeah, no, that's really well said, and I think it also raises another interesting dilemma here. That one that I've just has frustrated me for decades at this point. Uh, the supposed community guidelines are not set by the community; they're set by the corporation. And so, after there was a big outpouring of anger and frustration with Grok perpetuating this false narrative of white genocide. The company finally said, that this was a mistake from an engineer and it's against our policies. But it's an illustration of how meaningless these policies are.
Mm,
They're only enacted when the public gets so frustrated, and that so many things fall through cracks and become normalized without the
mm,
public saying anything, and then they become part of the larger culture.
mm. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Sydney, segue me. What's the next one?
Segue me. And we're in. We're going to do this one's a developing story, but some of the main factors that we are knowing right now and that have been confirmed plays into regard of the media. And we're going to talk about the story of the Palm Springs Fertility Clinic and what happened over the weekend. So we know that there was bombing at the facility, that one person had passed from it. And then the other things that we know that happened was supposedly so far the suspect was attempted to live record the attack. And then the second thing is that that I thought would be important to this particular conversation was that the suspect's social media accounts are being used to essentially identify them as being tied to antinatalism and beliefs of traditionally confined to these are beliefs that like traditionally have been confined to more philosophical circles, but they're recently becoming more extremist in an online context. So
Can
Reddit,
you
for example, yeah,
can you
go
give us
ahead.
an idea of what some of those views are? Like, what do you
Yeah,
mean?
so some natalistic views are usually people who don't believe that you should be born in any sense. So to have children is like a sin. And so they really are against any kind of birth of any sort and having people be in the world because it's not your choice to be in the world. And therefore, like the only way is to like never have children. That's kind of the viewpoint of that, but it's a very extremist viewpoint, one that traditionally hasn't been embraced very much. But in the online context, it's becoming more of a popular and extremist culture. Like Reddit, for example, has 232,000 members of that philosophy.
Wow, that's incredible. Did you get any sense of how old? I've never heard of this philosophy. You get any sense of
I
how
hadn't
old?
either until I hadn't either until I like went into it after the entire story came out and how old it is. That's a great question. I would have to like look into it, but it's something that I really hadn't looked into until this story came out.
Yeah, in a few weeks, I have Catherine Abramowitz from The Guardian coming on the show to talk about the proliferation of dinks, these couples they call the double income, no kids households.
Mhm, mhm.
So I'm gonna have to ask her about natalism, if seeing that has been a part of the dinks revolution at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's nothing wrong with not wanting kids. I think the problem occurs when you go to a fertility clinic and try to live stream an explosion. I think that's kind of where the extremist viewpoints come in, or the problem is coming in, is that people get into these online communities. They feel as if they've created a space in which people understand them or support their extremist ideologies. And then stuff happens in the real world. And then it's something that I've always tried to express in my own research is that online communities, online opinions are not just reflections of that online space. They're reflections of things that happen and some really bad things that happen in the real world, as I'm sure you've seen.
Yeah, that's a good point. That replication, I think, gets skipped because oftentimes, especially in like extreme situations, it's a minority, right? Millions of people may be a part of a community, and it only takes one or two to engage in something bad. But
Absolutely.
um, those who do engage in that bad behavior, that connection is rarely something we seem comfortable with as a society. So I
Mhm.
think it's really great you bring that up.
Yeah.
Um, Speaking of our society here and brief discussion of children, I can't. We're both, you and I are both educators and research education, among other things, in media. I want to talk about this story I saw on The Intercept about how, particularly women in Gaza, a place now where I think almost no schools are left standing or exist, are still trying to engage in education. They recognize it as a force of survival and a force of resistance to what they are experiencing from Israel. And I wondered, first of all, before we get in, because I have a few pithy things I want to say about how people in a demilitarized war zone are fighting for education. Yet we have tons of privileged people all around the United States who can't make it to class on time. I wondered what you kind of thought about this story from an educator point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it speaks to the power of education, the power of being able to learn, of wanting to learn. I think when I see stories like this, all I can think about is that idea that like learning and knowledge truly is like an ability to be able to articulate yourself and what you want out of life and the world and what you want for other people. And it brings a lot of hope to people. And I think in times like this, it's really beautiful to have that hope. And it's something that I think is a very strong, like a foundation of a very strong community and people who care about the youth around them and want them to have hope despite maybe hopeless seeming scenarios.
Yeah, I have the same take on it. And I always find it fascinating because I studied a lot of slave culture in the 19th century. And one of the things that I was amazed by was reading the writing of Frederick Douglass, who escaped slavery, and almost immediately out of slavery, he was talking about how the true liberation of Black people rested on access to education,
Mm.
and you see this from women too, right? The women's rights movement
Mhm.
wanted access to education. It's weird. All these groups who are barred from education recognize its power and utility, but here we are in the 21st century, one of the most privileged societies, and those who have access to it don't seem to appreciate it. I guess it's one of those things you don't really appreciate until it's gone. Does
Sure.
that fit with your experience?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's like health, right? Like we take so many things for granted in life, and until you get a cancer diagnosis, you're pretty much in the assumption that life goes on as needed to, and that you don't really have to do anything or really try super hard to get these things like education. It's just gifted to you or privileged to you. And so I do think that staying in a mindset and being self-aware that this is a privilege can be really beneficial to students who do have the gift of education, who have the gift of education for free, especially, or being able to go to an elite university, of being able to help others, of being a someone who can restore education to different areas of the population. I just think it's so important to be mindful of that as educators, but also as students too.
Yeah, and then let's get to I guess maybe our fun block or maybe disturbing block here, the AI companion piece. So I I forget which social media platform I was on, but I was scrolling and this came across my feed. This AI companion, as they called it, and we'll put it here on the screen. But for folks who are just listening and not watching, the advertisement for an AI companion has what looks like a very young girl. I don't know, Sydney. Could you guess an age on this AI generated child here?
Oh gosh, like 18.
Oh, really? Oh, gosh. Yeah, I looked even younger to me. I was thinking like 13ish.
Oh, well, I was just trying to legalize her. Oh.
Yeah, and so this is interesting because about 10 years ago, or maybe not even that long ago, I was reading some books about things we need to think about if we're going to be proactive with AI. And one of them was about the creation of these bots and like people's likenesses. And so like the question is like if someone creates a sex bot of you, like should there be legal protections that prevent
Mm,
them from doing that?
yeah,
Or if someone wants to create a sex bot of a child, should there be legal protections against that? And
yeah.
this ad really made me think of that, and also made me think of this book. I'm blanking on the author, but it was called Rethinking Sex. And the author basically said that like we've done a poor job in the 21st century. We've sort of reduced good sex and bad sex down to a question of consent. So as long as you have
Mhm.
consent, you're good. If you don't, it's bad.
Mhm.
And she points out, yeah, but there's like some really problematic practices. She talks about things like violence and pedophilia. And this ad made me kind of think about that, right? There's just no, as far as I know, no consent issue with this AI companion. But I think it does raise some uncomfortable questions about sex in the society in the age of AI. But what did you think when you saw this ad?
Yeah, I mean, it's just to me like the commodification of companionship, like it's being marketed as a purchasable product. And it makes me just think about like what happens when loneliness becomes a business opportunity rather than a societal concern. And loneliness is one of our biggest concerns right now. You see national selling books that talk about loneliness, about the loneliness epidemic in teens and anxiety and depression. And you have to wonder if companionship and AI companionship is our solution to that answer. How are we getting let off the hook as a society about being able to address this? And what are we missing and not being able to confront? And I think that's like a bigger question of like, what are we doing wrong and what do we like need to be doing better? And I think that the AI companion kind of tries to be like, well, this is our solution to this, and now we don't need to really handle it anymore.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think I don't know. You tell me. You know more of the scholarship on the well being side of this, but um, to me, it just seems like we keep trying to use non-human solutions to human problems, whether it be romantic connection or companionship or whatever. We have things where you can swipe left and right. You don't have to actually put yourself out there and connect with humans. I know I sound like an old fogey when saying that, but one of the things I always think is like everything is kind of an experiment. If we move all dating online and we get rid of like the human connection portion of it, just because it's different doesn't mean it's better. Now we can look
Mhm.
back with a decade or two of hindsight and determine, was this the best thing for the human race? I feel like this issue with companions is going to be the same thing. Does that
Yeah.
kind of align with sort of reading and seeing in your research and work?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's some of the things and you said you sound like more old school in this way, but I don't agree with you. I think that this is something that people should be more concerned about, aware about. Some of like the work for Jonathan Haidt's a huge scholar in this work of like social media and well-being. And we have different views in terms of like on like cell phone bans and things like that. But one of the things that he does a really great job of explaining that I love is that he talks about how, in the past, for example, that TV was very much a storyline that you could sit down with a group of friends and watch a show or a movie together. And it was a form of connection with the people around you still. You were still connecting with people about something that you are watching as a group versus now it's this is my companion who's on my cell phone under my passcode and only I can see them and only I know what they're talking to me about. And that becomes so much of this solo loneliness that you're saying, like, it's trying to solve issues that are human issues. And if it's not becoming clear already, AI doesn't have the capacity to solve some of these very deeply rooted issues. And I think what concerns me the most is that, especially the ad that we saw, it very much felt like it was more targeting people or could be targeting people who are looking for companionship, which makes me think, okay, these people are lonely. They are that population of students or of children who are looking for someone because they actually need someone to talk to. And I think when someone's in that place of vulnerability, you're then exposing them to machines instead of maybe a counselor or a therapist that they could need to talk to.
All right, detoxers. She's Sydney Sullivan. I'm Nolan Higdon. This has been a pleasure. We're going to continue to keep bringing you these updates on the headlines of everything that is media, education, politics, and tech. Let us know what you think. Leave us a comment, like, follow, and subscribe.
Hey Detoxers! Thanks for tuning in. You can find Disinfo Detox on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, and share. Every click helps grow the community and keeps those tech overlords happy. Detox complete.